There is nothing more terrifying than the sudden realization that the safety of your own home is an elaborate illusion. They assumed it was a standard chaotic home invasion executed by a faceless ghost who simply materialized from the cold desert darkness. The biological evidence painted a gruesome picture of a violent and desperate physical struggle taking place right on the threshold of the home. Official crime lab analysis would soon confirm the absolute worst fears of everyone involved. The blood found on the concrete definitively matched the DNA profile of the missing 84-year-old widow. The situation had instantly escalated from a mysterious disappearance into a confirmed violent abduction with a highly vulnerable victim. In standard police procedure, a bloody crime scene is treated as sacred ground. It is immediately locked down, taped off, and preserved at all costs to ensure that microscopic trace, evidence like hair fibers or footprints, can be meticulously collected by specialized forensic teams. The first 48 hours are absolutely critical for establishing a physical perimeter and tracking the immediate escape route of the suspect. But what happened next at this specific crime scene completely baffled legal experts and outraged the local community. The Pima County Sheriff Department, under the direct leadership of the sheriff, made a series of inexplicable and highly controversial decisions that completely derailed the initial investigation. But the federal agents who eventually took over the botched investigation dug much deeper into the digital cloud archives and found, despite the confirmed presence of the victim's blood and the clear signs of a violent forced entry, county authorities authorized the rapid release of the crime scene back to the family entirely too early. They failed to maintain a strict multi-day lockdown of the property, allowing potential evidence to be trampled and permanently destroyed by unauthorized foot traffic. Furthermore, the department made the absolutely stunning choice to pull their highly trained canine tracking units completely off the search. The specially trained dogs, the absolute best tool available for following a fresh scent trail leading away from a bloody scene, were abruptly ordered to stand down. The physical investigation was essentially paralyzed by these catastrophic administrative decisions. The crucial physical footprint of the alleged attacker was allowed to literally blow away in the harsh desert wind. But as the physical evidence degraded, a far more disturbing realization began to take shape among independent analysts reviewing the initial facts of the case. They started looking very closely at the extreme efficiency of the masked man. When you analyze the sheer speed and the absolute precision of the camera attack, a chilling psychological profile begins to emerge, something that fundamentally changes everything we know about how predators stalk their targets in the modern technological age. The suspect did not stumble onto the porch and scramble to find the camera in a blind panic. He approached from an angle that perfectly minimized his exposure to the wide-angle lens for as long as physically possible. He knew exactly where the blind spots were located along the walkway. He knew exactly how much physical force was required to instantly kill the power feed without setting off secondary tamper alarms. This level of tactical smoothness is incredibly rare in random home invasions. It strongly indicates that the intruder possessed an intimate and highly detailed knowledge of the exterior layout of the house. He moved through the physical space with the terrifying confidence of someone who had already mapped out every single inch of the property beforehand. The sheer perfection of his execution forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question about the true nature of this horrific crime. Do you think the man hiding behind the mask was a complete stranger, or do you suspect that this incredibly precise attacker was actually someone who knew the layout of her home intimately? They discovered that the violent physical breach on the 1st of February was absolutely not a spontaneous act of opportunity or a random burglary gone wrong. Drop down into the comments right now and tell me your theory about the identity of the intruder, because the sheer calculation involved in this attack is absolutely staggering. The evidence strongly suggests he was not guessing in the dark. He was following a highly rehearsed script. The devastating mismanagement of the physical crime scene by the local county deputies quickly created an immense public outcry that could not be ignored. The massive gaps in the traditional police response, combined with the highly vulnerable age of the missing woman, forced a rapid escalation in the scope of the search. The Federal Bureau of Investigation officially stepped in to take over the stalled case, bringing with them a massive influx of specialized resources and highly advanced technical capabilities. The federal agents immediately recognized that the physical trail leading away from the bloody porch was completely cold and hopelessly contaminated by the poor initial handling. They knew they could not rely on tracking dogs or tire treads in the dirt to find the missing victim. It was the calculated finale of a terrifying and meticulously planned timeline. Instead, they completely shifted the entire focus of the massive manhunt away from the physical desert and directly into the infinite landscape of the digital cloud. The local police had simply looked at the shattered plastic casing of the doorbell camera, hanging by a wire, and incorrectly assumed that all the visual evidence was permanently destroyed. They believed that because the hardware was dead, the video file was completely lost. But the federal cyber analysts understood the complex architecture of modern smart home security systems far better than the county officers. They knew that sophisticated internet-connected devices do not simply store their video files on a fragile internal memory card located inside the camera housing. Instead, these devices are constantly pushing heavy streams of encrypted data packets through the local wireless router and directly up to a massive remote back-end server bank. The FBI agents bypassed the ruined camera entirely and served comprehensive federal warrants directly to the technology executives at Google. They demanded immediate and total access to the deepest residual data logs associated with the victim's specific residential account. They were hunting for the tiny, microscopic fragments of uncompiled digital information that might have successfully... Before we rewind the surveillance footage to look at the alleged stalker caught on tape exactly 20, transmitted in the exact milliseconds between the suspect grabbing the lens and the physical power connection finally snapping. Their highly specialized digital forensic excavation paid off in a massive way. The federal technicians successfully recovered the crucial video file from the remote servers, proving that the alleged attacker had failed to outrun the speed of the broadband internet connection. This incredible technical victory provided the exact physical description of the masked intruder carrying the Ozark Trail backpack. But the federal agents did not stop their investigation after recovering that single, terrifying video clip from the 1st of February. The seasoned investigators knew that a criminal who executes a targeted strike with such incredible precision rarely acts on a sudden random impulse. They hypothesized that the flawless nature of the camera breach strongly indicated a significant period of prior planning and careful observation. Following this highly analytical investigative logic, the federal cyber team decided to dig much deeper into the historical data archives provided by the technology company. They requested the complete comprehensive logs for the entire security system stretching back several weeks prior to the violent abduction. Days earlier, make sure you hit the subscribe button for Ronan Cold Cases and turn on all notifications. They instructed their advanced computer systems to meticulously scan through hundreds of hours of mundane footage, looking for absolutely any subtle anomalies or strange network alerts that the victim might have completely dismissed or simply slept through. They reviewed countless hours of cars driving past stray animals, walking across the grass, and mail carriers dropping off packages. The investigators were searching for a needle in a massive digital haystack, hoping to find any clue that could explain how the attacker knew the layout of the property so perfectly. The exhaustive review process was incredibly tedious and mentally draining for the forensic team. But as the cyber analysts slowly worked their way backward through the timeline of January, they suddenly hit a massive and deeply disturbing inconsistency in the data logs. They discovered a highly irregular system event buried deep within the archived files that completely shattered the established timeline of the case. They found absolute digital proof that the terrifying events of February 1st were not an isolated incident at all. We are about to pull back the curtain on a deeply disturbing law enforcement investigation where the digital breadcrumbs lead straight into an absolute nightmare. The comprehensive server logs revealed that the system had recorded a very specific and highly alarming motion trigger exactly 20 days earlier. The federal agents stared at their computer monitors in absolute stunned silence as they watched the previously unseen security footage. The meticulous review of the historical data had finally uncovered a terrifying digital ghost hiding quietly in the dark corners of the past. The investigators realized with a profound sense of dread that they were no longer just looking at the footage of a sudden kidnapping. They were looking at the meticulously documented early stages of a highly organized and long-term predatory hunt. The digital breadcrumbs had finally led them straight to the absolute most horrifying discovery of the entire investigation. The revelation leaked to national media outlets, including NBC News, detailed a completely separate and terrifying event that occurred on January 11th. This was not a minor technical glitch or a stray animal triggering the motion sensors in the middle of the night. Long before the violent disappearance, a shadow had already visited the property. The electronic logs indicated that someone had approached the residence under the cover of darkness and interacted with the environment just enough to register as an anomaly. What happens when the expensive devices you buy to keep the dangerous monsters out are actually just recording them patiently, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? But because no glass was broken and no alarms blared, this initial intrusion was likely dismissed as a harmless false positive. This happens constantly in modern neighborhoods, where wind-blown debris or a passing car can send a meaningless notification to a smartphone. People eventually become desensitized to the constant stream of minor alerts, and they stop checking the live video feeds every single time the phone chimes. The predator was banking on exactly this type of human fatigue. He was operating in the gray area between an annoying notification and a genuine emergency. Think about the sheer psychological terror embedded in this specific revelation. Almost 3 weeks before the ultimate tragedy unfolded, the perpetrator was physically present on the grounds while the resident was completely vulnerable and resting inside. He was breathing the cold night air and analyzing the physical defenses of the structure. He did not simply drive by in a vehicle to case the neighborhood from a safe distance. He crossed the property line and stepped into the designated surveillance zone. The terrifying answer lies hidden deep inside the erased server logs of a compromised family home. He was testing the waters and seeing exactly how the environment would react to his presence. Would exterior floodlights immediately turn on? Would a dog start barking from behind the door? Would police cruisers roll down the street within 10 minutes? By deliberately creating a low-level disturbance and then melting back into the shadows he was, gathering critical intelligence about the response time of both the homeowner and the local authorities. The silence that followed his initial January visit was the most dangerous feedback he could possibly receive. It told him that the perimeter was essentially unguarded, and that his target was entirely oblivious to the imminent danger lurking just outside her walls. The leaked reports regarding this prior incident sent a massive wave of paranoia washing over the entire community. Suddenly, every single discarded notification and every ignored chime from a smart device felt like a potential death sentence. If a highly organized criminal could probe a property so effectively without raising any serious red flags, then nobody was truly safe behind their locked doors. Imagine locking your heavy deadbolts, turning on your bright porch light, and checking the glowing green indicator of your smart doorbell before finally going to sleep. To understand how this catastrophic security failure occurred, we must first examine the environment the victim built for herself. It forces you to wonder how many times a predator might have walked past your own windows, while you were completely distracted by a television show or sleeping soundly in your bed. You need to pause this video right now and immediately review the ignored alert history on your own home security. Applications. Because the next seemingly harmless notification you receive might actually be someone testing your defenses. The investigators realized that the individual responsible for the eventual abduction possessed an incredibly chilling level of patience. He did not rush the operation or let adrenaline dictate his actions. He was willing to invest weeks into studying his prey and ensuring that every single variable was accounted for before executing the final strike. This extreme level of premeditation completely shattered the initial theories proposed by the county deputies. This was not a crime of passion or a desperate robbery committed by a chaotic opportunist. It was a cold and calculating hunt orchestrated by someone who understood exactly how to manipulate the false sense of security provided by consumer-grade electronics. Nancy Guthrie was an 84-year-old widow living entirely alone in a modest single-story house. The January 11th event was the crucial puzzle piece that transformed the narrative from a tragic mystery into a terrifying story of prolonged stalking. The authorities were no longer hunting a ghost who appeared out of nowhere. They were actively searching for a disciplined predator who had been watching, waiting, and preparing for the perfect moment to completely dismantle a life. The psychological burden of knowing that someone had been lurking outside for weeks is almost impossible to fully comprehend. It taints every single memory of those final peaceful days. Every time the resident went to the grocery store or tended to the garden, she was likely being observed by a man who had already decided her fate. The invisible crosshairs were locked onto her, and she had absolutely no idea that a countdown had already started ticking down to zero. The realization that the electronic sentinels failed to sound a massive warning during the initial probing phase exposes a terrifying flaw in our reliance on passive monitoring. The machine saw a brief motion event and logged it away quietly into the digital archives while a monster patiently waited outside. For someone of her advanced age and vulnerable physical condition, the concept of personal security is no longer just a luxury. The synchronization between the January probing and the February assault is the most devastating twist of the entire case. The extreme efficiency that completely baffled everyone during the initial crime scene analysis was not a stroke of criminal genius or incredible luck. It was the direct result of a highly successful dress rehearsal. The perpetrator had already stood on that exact concrete slab. He had already measured the exact height of the lens. He had already calculated the precise angle of the streetlights to keep his face completely hidden in the shadows. The January event was a deliberate dry run designed specifically to expose the blind spots of the surveillance network. When he returned 3 weeks later, he was not guessing about how the equipment would react. He possessed absolute empirical knowledge of its weaknesses. This revelation drastically reframes our understanding of his methodology. It becomes a fundamental requirement for independent survival. He knew exactly how many seconds it would take to cross the yard before the motion tracking activated. He knew the specific pressure required to snap the mounting bracket without causing a loud metallic clang that might wake the neighbors. The sheer terror lies in the realization that the actual abduction was merely the final step in a heavily vetted project plan. He essentially audited the security posture of the property and found it severely lacking. The terrifying truth is that the resident was likely marked for abduction the very second the January test proved successful. The suspect walked away from that initial encounter knowing with absolute certainty that he could breach the perimeter anytime he wanted. The 20 intervening days were not spent hesitating or reconsidering his dark intentions. Those 3 weeks were likely utilized to prepare the secondary location and finalize the logistics of moving a human captive across county lines without drawing any unwanted attention from highway patrols. The psychological impact of this discovery is absolutely staggering, but her approach to safety contained a deeply unsettling anomaly. It means that the violent destruction of the hardware on the night of the disappearance was a fully choreographed movement. He executed the strike with the muscle memory of a man who had already played the scenario out in his mind 100 times. The chilling efficiency that initially looked like a random act of chaos was actually the hallmark of an apex predator executing a well-refined strategy. You have to wonder what other houses in that same neighborhood were subjected to similar terrifying audits. Did he test multiple properties before selecting the most vulnerable target on the block? The sheer volume of unknowns surrounding his selection process adds a suffocating layer of dread to the entire investigation. The authorities were suddenly faced with a suspect profile that was vastly more sophisticated than they ever anticipated. They were dealing with an individual who treated home invasion like a tactical military operation. He gathered intelligence, tested the defenses, adapted his approach, and then launched a surgical strike that left virtually zero physical evidence behind. The connection between the two dates perfectly explains why the local deputies were so easily outmaneuvered in the critical early hours. Instead of relying on the physical presence of family members, roommates, or hired caretakers, she placed her absolute trust in an invisible network of automated electronic sentinels. They arrived at the scene, expecting a chaotic aftermath, but they were actually walking into the remnants of a perfectly executed professional extraction. The perpetrator was playing a completely different game, utilizing patience and observation as his primary weapons. The realization that a digital system designed to prevent crime was actually utilized as a training tool by the criminal is the ultimate paradox of this case. The technology did exactly what it was programmed to do, but the human operators failed to interpret the subtle warning signs hiding in the data stream until it was far too late to intervene. The dry run was a silent declaration of war that went completely unnoticed by everyone except the man planning the attack. He turned the quiet neighborhood into his own private laboratory, testing theories and gathering data, while the residents slept soundly nearby. This perfectly orchestrated sequence of events completely dismantles the comforting idea that violent crime is always loud, messy, and unpredictable. Sometimes the most dangerous threats are the ones that arrive quietly, take meticulous notes, and then patiently wait for the perfect night to return. The devastating clarity provided by linking these two specific dates elevates this case into a masterclass on the horrific realities of modern organized stalking. Her home was essentially transformed into a localized monitoring station. The monster did not just arrive on the 1st of February, he had been living in the shadows of the property for weeks. The realization that he was essentially an invisible roommate, sharing the perimeter of the property for an extended duration, forces investigators to completely reconsider the timeline of the threat. Every single mundane activity performed by the victim during that 3-week window was potentially monitored, analyzed, and categorized by a ruthless individual preparing to strike. This is the true definition of a waking nightmare. Despite the massive breakthrough in understanding the methodology of the suspect, the cold and brutal reality of the situation remained completely unchanged. The profound analytical victories achieved by the federal agents did not magically produce the physical location of the missing widow. The complex digital tapestry they wove together from the server archives provided a flawless explanation of how the perimeter was breached, but it offered absolutely zero coordinates for where the perpetrator went next. The investigation hit a massive wall of silence, just as the true horror of the stalking became fully apparent. She wore a medical alert system designed to instantly broadcast distress signals to emergency responders if her heart rate spiked or if she suffered a sudden fall. Furthermore, the crucial revelation regarding the January 11th dry run eventually became entangled in a complex web of corporate liability and technical backtracking. As the media scrutiny intensified and the public demanded answers, the technology company reportedly began to walk back their definitive statements regarding the historical data logs. They issued carefully worded press releases, suggesting that the anomaly might have simply been a highly unusual system error rather than a confirmed human presence. This sudden corporate pivot created a massive cloud of confusion and severely undermined the public confidence in the investigation. The local county officials, who were still reeling from the intense criticism of their initial crime scene management, eagerly latched onto this ambiguity to deflect blame. However, despite the corporate attempts to downplay the significance of the earlier date, the federal investigators refused to completely abandon the stalker theory. The behavioral patterns exhibited during the final violent breach simply aligned too perfectly with the concept of a rehearsed operation. The agents continued to operate under the chilling assumption that the suspect had indeed stalked the property, even if the digital evidence was now being publicly contested by the hardware manufacturer. The conflicting narratives between the law enforcement agencies and the technology giants added an incredibly frustrating layer of bureaucracy to an already agonizing situation. The perimeter of her property was constantly guarded by a Google Nest camera that acted as, but all of the arguments over server logs and timestamp accuracy ultimately rang incredibly hollow for the family members who were still desperately waiting for a phone call that never came. The brilliant digital forensic work proved unequivocally that a predator had hunted their loved one, but it was utterly powerless to bring her back home. The physical absence of the victim is a haunting reminder that while we can engineer a crime using lines of code, we cannot digitally resurrect a human life. The perpetrator successfully navigated the massive blind spots in both the local police response and the automated security network. He utilized the structural weaknesses of the community to execute his plan, and then simply vanished into the vast expanse of the surrounding landscape. The incredible frustration stems from the fact that he was captured on camera multiple times, yet he remains completely unidentifiable and completely free. The resolution of this specific narrative arc is deeply unsatisfying because it ends with a technological stalemate. We know exactly how he defeated the system, but we possess absolutely no idea who he is or where he took his captive. A tireless digital watchman scanning the front walkway for any signs of human movement. The agonizing truth is that all the processing power in the world cannot compensate for a clever criminal who knows exactly when to step out of the frame and disappear into the analog world. The case stands as a monument to the chilling effectiveness of patience and preparation in the commission of a violent felony. The digital answers simply generated more agonizing physical questions that remain completely unanswered to this very day. The vast desert swallowed him whole, and the servers cannot tell us where he went. The investigators are left staring at a perfectly assembled puzzle that is missing the most crucial piece. The entire community remains paralyzed by the unresolved nature of the disappearance, wondering if the careful predator has permanently retired or if he has simply moved on to a new hunting ground in a different county. The lack of closure turns every shadow into a potential threat, and every creaking floorboard into a reason to panic. The technological marvels that were supposed to solve the case only highlighted our profound vulnerability. You believe you are completely alone and perfectly secure behind your impenetrable digital fortress. This overwhelming reliance on interconnected technology created a powerful illusion of an impenetrable barrier. The forensic insight gleaned from this terrifying sequence of events revolves around a critical concept known as the dry run. In the realm of organized criminal psychology, predators rarely execute a high-stakes abduction without first testing the environmental variables. They deliberately trigger false alarms to measure law enforcement response times and carefully observe how homeowners react to minor nighttime disturbances. A slightly shifted patio chair or an unexplained notification on your mobile device might not be a random occurrence. It could easily be the first stage of a meticulous intelligence-gathering operation orchestrated by a patient stalker. You must learn to analyze these subtle anomalies rather than simply dismissing them out of absolute convenience. What this case teaches us about the illusion of digital perimeters is absolutely vital for modern community safety. We have collectively replaced physical vigilance with a profound over-reliance on consumer electronics. A camera is fundamentally just a recording device. It possesses absolutely no capability to physically intervene or prevent a violent escalation from occurring on your property. The blinking lights and automated push notifications gave her faraway family a profound sense of comfort. When you mistakenly equate digital surveillance with actual physical security, you inadvertently create a massive psychological vulnerability. You become a passive observer in your own life, trusting a machine to protect you from individuals who possess the intelligence to simply turn the machine off. The harsh reality is that a sophisticated predator will actively use your predictable surveillance grid to calculate the exact optimal moment to strike. Technology is merely a tool, and if you fail to remain continually vigilant, the criminal element will inevitably use that exact same tool to orchestrate your ultimate downfall. Security is a continuous active process, and it cannot be permanently outsourced to a blinking light on your front porch. The chilling reality is that the masked individual carrying the dark utility backpack remains completely unidentified and entirely unaccountable for his horrific actions. He successfully executed a masterclass in modern predatory stalking and slipped right through the fingers of a fragmented justice system. The most terrifying aspect of this unresolved mystery is the undeniable fact that he is still out there. Where is he hiding right now? Is he currently standing in the deep shadows across the street from another quiet suburban house, patiently studying the glow of another security lens? They truly believed that nothing sinister could possibly happen to the elderly woman without an immediate digital alarm being triggered and dispatched to the local police department. Is he silently counting the seconds until the lights go out so he can begin a brand new countdown to terror? The thought that he might be preparing for his next rehearsal is absolutely paralyzing. You must subscribe to Ronan Cold Cases right now and make sure you ring the notification bell so you do not miss our next deep dive into the darkest corners of unsolved criminal history. The digital logs might be compromised, but the pursuit of the truth never stops. Stay vigilant, lock your doors, and remember that the glowing light on your porch might not be protecting you at all. She lived her days in a quiet and highly structured routine. She ran her errands, attended her appointments, and always returned to the comforting hum of her surveilled sanctuary before it got too dark outside. The external doors were always locked tight. The medical pendant was always worn around her neck. The camera lens was always wiped clean to ensure a perfect high-definition view of the street. It was a perfectly rational response to the natural vulnerabilities of aging alone. But there is a very dark side to building a fortress entirely out of wires and wireless fidelity signals. Electronic systems lack human intuition and physical strength. But what if a violent stranger was not just breaking in at 1:45 in the morning on a random quiet night? They cannot reach out and grab the arm of an intruder. They cannot barricade a door from the inside. They are simply passive observers, designed to record and transmit data. And when an entire security protocol is outsourced to machines, a dangerous psychological blind spot begins to form. You stop looking out the windows because you assume the camera will notify you if someone is there. You stop listening for strange footsteps on the porch because you trust the motion sensor to sound the alarm. The residents of her quiet street shared this collective complacency. They viewed the glowing rings of their doorbell cameras as magical wards that would repel any criminal element. But the camera mounted beside her front door was not just standing guard over her peaceful retirement. It was quietly and systematically documenting her highly predictable daily routine. What if that exact same alleged attacker had been standing in the exact same spot in the pitch-dark 3? Every time she left the house at the same hour, every time she returned alone. Every time the lights went out in the front room, the system logged the event. The blinking green light meant the area was secure, but it also meant the machine was blindly recording the exact schedule of an isolated and defenseless target. That little piece of plastic and glass was meant to be her ultimate protector against the unknown evils of the world. Yet in the dark and quiet hours of the night, it was slowly and unwittingly transforming into a digital diary that chronicled the precise steps of how its owner was turning into prey. The comforting illusion of safety held strong through the final quiet hours of January 31st. The surrounding suburban neighborhood was completely dead, and the winter air was cold enough to keep most residents securely indoors. Nancy had returned safely to her residence after a routine evening, and the digital log showed her settling comfortably into her familiar nightly pattern. The heavy deadbolts were physically secured, and the interior of the house fell completely silent. Weeks earlier, staring directly into the lens of your security camera while you were fast asleep in your bed. Outside, the Google Nest camera stood its constant watch over the empty concrete walkway leading to the front door. For several hours, the only things captured by the wide-angle lens were the shadows cast by the streetlights and the occasional passing vehicle. Everything appeared perfectly normal and entirely peaceful, but the artificial tranquility of the neighborhood was violently shattered at exactly 1:45 in the morning on February 1st. The sensitive motion sensors built into the front porch surveillance system suddenly triggered an alert. The camera instantly woke up from its standby state and began recording the immediate area in high definition. A solitary, ominous figure stepped out of the darkness and directly into the illuminated frame. The intruder was an unknown male, heavily concealed in dark, non-reflective clothing from head to toe. The raw footage captured a man standing approximately 5 feet 9 inches tall, with a solid medium physical build. His face was completely obscured by a dark mask, leaving absolutely no visible identifying features for the authorities to analyze. That is the chilling reality of a highly organized abduction case that completely shattered the peace of a quiet suburban neighborhood. Slung purposefully over his shoulder was a large black utility backpack. Federal investigators would later positively identify this specific bag as a popular model manufactured by the Ozark Trail brand. This was definitely not a lost traveler or a confused neighbor stumbling to the wrong address. The suspect moved with a chilling level of predatory grace and absolute physical confidence. He did not hesitate on the front steps. He did not look around nervously to see if any witnesses were watching from the street. He marched in a direct and perfectly straight line toward the main entry point of the house. His eyes were completely hidden, but his aggressive body language made his terrifying intentions incredibly clear. He was entirely focused on the glowing electronic eye of the smart doorbell. Most amateur burglars will immediately panic when they realize they are standing directly in front of an active recording device. When an 84-year-old widow was violently taken from her house in the dead of night, the local authorities, they will instinctively turn away or flee the scene to avoid capture. This alleged attacker did the exact opposite. He rapidly closed the distance between himself and the camera lens with alarming speed. He knew exactly where the security device was mounted, and he knew exactly what he needed to do to blind the house. He reached forward with a gloved hand and made direct physical contact with the hardware. He did not smash it wildly with a blunt weapon. The movement was incredibly sharp, deliberate, and highly practiced. He applied the precise amount of physical force needed to violently snap the device away from its secure mounting bracket and sever its internal power connection. The internal microphone captured the sharp, sickening crack of hard plastic breaking and thin metal wires tearing apart. It was the terrifying sound of the digital perimeter completely collapsing in real time. The brilliant, clear feed of the suspect reaching forward suddenly froze in place. Initially treated the shattered doorbell camera on the front porch as the definitive starting line of the crime. A fraction of a second later, the video file violently terminated and the entire screen dissolved into absolute blackness. The digital watchman was dead. The final line of defense had been ruthlessly bypassed by a man carrying a cheap retail backpack. The abrupt, chilling silence that followed that final recorded click was far more terrifying than any loud alarm. The darkness that swallowed the porch was not just the absence of light. It was the definitive end of the passive observation period and the terrifying beginning of a highly organized abduction that had been scheduled right down to the very second. When the morning sun finally illuminated the property a few hours later, the true horror of what happened in the dark became immediately apparent. The shattered remnants of the doorbell camera hung uselessly by a few colored wires, completely destroyed. But the broken plastic was not the most alarming discovery on the property. As the initial responding units arrived at the scene, they found a significant and deeply disturbing amount of blood pooled directly on the front porch.